Well, welcome to part 2 of factoring quadratics. So you've mastered factoring, hopefully, when the leading coefficient is 1. Let's see if we can review how to factor when the leading coefficient is not 1. So first thing we want to look at, if it's possible, we want to factor out any common factors first. Okay, common factors would be a number that goes into all three terms of our polynomial. And let me grab my pen here. So we want to look at, in this example, is there any number that goes into 2, 12, and 10? And I always start with 2 if they're even numbers. And in this case, I know that 2 goes into 2, 2 goes into 12, and 2 goes into 10. So I'm simply going to factor that out of all three terms. I'm going to put that out in the front. So 2 times what gives me 2x squared? That's going to be x squared. 2 times what gives me 12x, that's a positive 6x, and 2 times what gives me positive 10, that is positive 5. Okay, so we've factored out our common factor. Now we have to look at inside the parentheses. Can we factor that polynomial further? So if we have x squared plus 6x plus 5, we're going to factor this like we did in part 1 of factoring quadratics. Okay, so I'll get another color here so it's clear. Let's try green. I like green. Green's a good color. So we want factors of positive 5 that are going to add up to 6. Okay, and just to be careful, let's write out all of our factors. So we have 1 and 5. Okay, and 2 and, oh, no, just kidding. See why it's good to write out all those factors? Okay, so 5 is a prime number, so only 1 and 5, and do those in fact add up to positive 6? Yes, they do. So I'm going to keep the 2 from the outside, bring it down, and then I have x plus 1 times x plus 5. Okay? And if these terms cannot be factored any further, which they can't, then we've factored our polynomial completely, and we're done. Okay? You can check this by multiplying all these numbers out like we did in the first video and seeing if, in fact, we get what we started with, and you should. But what do we do if there aren't any common factors? So if we have an equation of the form a x squared plus bx plus c, and there's no number that goes into a, b, and c. And a is not 1. Okay, so we've got some coefficient in front of our x. Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to multiply a and c, our first term and our last term, and find what that number is. Then find factors of that product that add up to our b term. Then we're going to rewrite our middle term, b, into those two factors. And then finally, we want to find, we're going to factor out each half of our equation here. Okay, it'll be a little more clear when I show you a specific example. So let's move on to an example. Suppose we have 5x squared minus 17x plus 6. And I'll get a pen here. Let's do, I always like using fun colors, so let's use a fun color. How about purple or pink? Some sort of magenta color here. Okay, the first thing we want to do is multiply our a and our c term. And we want to keep the sign with our c term. So we have positive 5 times positive 6, so that's 30. We're looking for factors of 30 that add up to negative 17. Okay, so since we have a positive 30, we know they're going to both have the same sign. Positive means same sign. And they're going to add to a negative number, so they're both going to have to be negative. So we could have negative 1 and negative 30. Okay, but those don't give us negative 17, so those don't work. Negative 2, negative 15, those are factors of 30. Negative 5 and negative 6. I think I forgot negative 3 and negative 10. Okay, so if we go through those, the ones that add up to negative 17 here are negative 2 and negative 15. So the next let's look back at our steps. Okay, so we've multiplied a and c, we've found factors of a, c that add up to b, so now we're going to rewrite our middle term. So we're going to take our negative 17 and rewrite it as negative 2x and negative 5x. So that looks like this. In our next step, so we have 5x squared minus 2x minus 15x. Okay, because we know that negative 2x and negative 15x, those are going to add up together to get negative 17x, and then we keep the 6. Okay, so now that we've rewritten, we have to find the common factor of each half here. So we're going to treat it as if we've got two separate equations for now. So let's look at 5x squared and negative 2x. Well, the common factor there is that they both have an x term. So if we bring out the x in front, we're left with 5x, because x times 5x gives you 5x squared, and then negative 2, because x times negative 2 gives you negative 2x. Then we want to look at the right-hand side. So over here, we have negative 15x and positive 6. The number that goes into both negative 15 and positive 6 is 3. Now we want to keep the sign of the first term here. So we're going to factor out a negative 3, because negative 3 would make what's inside here positive. Okay, so negative 3 times what gives us negative 15x, and that is positive 5x. And then negative 3 times what gives us positive 6? Well, that's negative 2. Now your check that you did this right. If this number here and this number here are the same, then you factored correctly. Okay, if not, then you might want to go back and check, or you might want to check that it's even factorable at all. So then 5x minus 2 is going to be one of our factors. And then the other factor, we're going to take x and our negative 3. So x minus 3 is our other factor. And then we're done. And then we want to, if you want to check this, you can check by foiling out. So that's our answer. We can check by actually foiling these out. So we have 5x minus 2 times x minus 3. And if we FOIL, we get 5x times x, that's 5x squared. 5x times negative 3, that's negative 15x. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. And negative 2 times negative 3 is positive 6. So that in fact equals 5x squared minus 17x plus 6. So we ended up with what we started with. Okay, so our check verified that this is in fact the solution. And we factored. Okay, so if you need to see another example, I'm going to show another example here. If not, feel free to fast forward the video to special patterns, which will be the next slide. Okay, so here we're going to again do step 1, where we multiply our first and our third term. So if I multiply 3 and negative 7, that gives me negative 21. And I'm looking for factors of negative 21 that are going to add to this middle term, positive 20. Okay, since it's a negative 21, we know that 1 is going to be positive and 1 is going to be negative, because a positive times a negative gives you a negative number, and that's the only way we can get a negative number. So let's start listing the factors of 21. We've got 1 and 21, 3 and 7. And if we know 1 is going to be positive and 1 is negative, so let's start with negative 1 and 21 and negative 3 and 7. And then the other ones could be, other numbers could have the minus sign. So we could have negative 7 and 3 and negative 21 and positive 1. Now let's look at which one of these add to positive 20. That's going to be negative 1 plus 21. Okay, you can verify using your calculator if you need to. So we're going to rewrite our middle term here as negative 1x and positive 21x. So that gives us 3x squared minus x plus 21x minus 7. Okay, you can verify negative x plus 21x gives you positive 20x. Next, we want to treat these as two separate problems, and we're going to factor each half. So if we look at 3x squared minus x, they have a common factor of x. What's left over? Well, here we have 3x, and here we have negative 1, because x times negative 1 gives you negative x. Okay, if we look at the right-hand side of our problem, if we look at factors of 21x and factors of negative 7, 7 goes into both of those. So we're going to factor out a positive 7. Okay, it's going to have the same sign as this number right here. So 7 times what gives us positive 21? Only number there is 3x, and it's positive. And then 7 times negative 1 gives us negative 7. And our check here is that 3x minus 1 is in both terms there. So we did in fact factor correctly, and we can move forward. So 3x minus 1 is one of our factors, and then x plus 7 is our other factor. And we have finished factoring. Okay, you can FOIL these out to verify that it is indeed 3x squared plus 20x minus 7. Okay, but these are equivalent. This is the factored form. Okay, I'm going to give you a chance to see one more example worked out. This is a little bit different from the previous two that we just did, because if we look at 12x squared minus 4x minus 40, notice all three of those terms have a common factor of 4. So we want to pull out that common factor first. And if we do that, we're left with 3x squared minus x minus 10. Okay? You can check by distributing. 4 times 3x gives you 12x. 4 times negative x gives you negative 4x. And 4 times negative 10 gives you negative 40. Okay, so this started off as what we did in the first slide here. Okay, but the second half is different. Because if we look at 3x squared minus x minus 10, we can factor that further. And in fact, these don't have any common factors, so we're going to have to use the method that we used in the previous two slides. So we want to bring down our 4 because we know that's going to continue to be a factor in the next step. Okay, and then we want to look at if we multiply 3 and 10, that gives us negative 30. And we want to find factors of negative 30 that add up to negative 1. Okay, so if we list our factors of 30, that is 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. Now, this is a negative 30, so we're going to have one positive and one negative. Okay? And they are going to add up to negative 1. So let's make one of these negative here, then we'll flip them, make the opposite one negative. So negative 10 and 3, negative 15 and 2, and negative 30 and 1. And if we look through and add each of these up, the only ones that will add up to negative 1 are negative 6 and positive 5. So in our next step, we're going to rewrite our middle term. So we have 3x squared minus 6x plus 5x minus 10. Notice how I kept the 4 out here. Then we want to treat these as two separate pieces here. And we're going to factor out the common factor in each piece. So I keep my 4 on the outside. Okay, then we're going to have, and you know what, sometimes it's easier if we make a bracket instead of putting parentheses there twice. Okay, so we have 3x squared and negative 6x. 3 goes into both of those, and x goes into both of those, so I'm going to take 3x on the outside. What's left over? We have an x, because 3x times x gives us 3x squared, and then we have a negative 2. Okay, then we want to look at the plus 5x minus 10, and 5 goes into both of those, and we're left with x minus 2. Okay? So x minus 2 is going to be one of our factors, and 3x plus 5 is another factor. We keep the 4, so that's 4 times 3x plus 5 times x minus 2. And that's our answer.